There are calls for the reform of A-levels after a record number of entries were awarded the top grades. Almost 45% of entries were awarded A or A star, fueling concerns about so-called grade inflation. Labour says it's worried about inequality.
Well done, by the way, to all of those that got the results that they want. But the gap now is getting bigger and bigger, and there's baked-in unfairness.
We'll bring you the latest on the debate, also this lunchtime. US President Joe Biden says he doesn't regret pulling out troops from Afghanistan, despite Taliban militants taking over more of the country. Prosecutors in Germany say a British man who worked at the UK embassy in Berlin has been arrested on suspicion of spying for Russia. Wildfires are continuing to burn in Algeria in North Africa, in California and in parts of Greece. And under threat, seahorses off the coast of Dorset.
Divers put this screw anchor into the seabed, then connected to these rubber pieces here. Thick, dense rubber. This is what replaces the chains on a traditional mooring that are said to do so much of the damage.
And coming up in sport on the BBC News channel, the Premier League's chief executive says he's fully behind players taking a knee when the new season begins on Friday.
Hi, good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. There are calls for an overhaul of the way A-levels are assessed and graded in the future, after this year's results saw record numbers given top marks. Almost 45% of entries in England, Wales and Northern Ireland were awarded A or A star, fueling concerns that soaring grades risk undermining confidence in the system. Ministers are reported to be looking at replacing the traditional A to E grades with numbers similar to GCSEs. Sean Daly has the story.
The ring of success could barely resonate louder for many students across the UK still celebrating a top year for marks. But now the government is under pressure to review the way qualifications are assessed, and concerns have been raised about the attainment gap between fee-paying schools in England, where around 7 in 10 students achieved an A or A star, compared to state schools where around 4 in 10 did. The Labour Party is among those calling for change.
Well done, by the way, to all of those that got the results that they want. But the gap now is getting bigger and bigger, and there's baked-in unfairness. And yet again, it's the students who most need the...
The government's former education czar for England, who resigned over a high-profile disagreement about catch-up funding, is backing calls for a review, but believes that fairness issues are much wider than an attainment gap between state and fee-paying schools in England.
I think we should be worried. I think we should be worried about not only the gap at A levels, but the gap we see throughout the system. To tackle that and to deal with that, we need a comprehensive, robust and long-term plan. I don't believe that recovery will happen naturally, and I think if we don't do something intentional about it, we will have growing inequality in our education system.
UK students taking A-levels, Scottish Highers and vocational qualifications have been subject to teacher-assessed grading to calculate their grades. In recent pre-pandemic years, the government in England has put a higher focus on exam day performance.
The fairest means of assessing people is by continuous assessment. And the only way that can be done properly is if teachers are taught how to assess.
The government is now under pressure to review how qualifications are assessed in the future, for instance by replacing A-level grades with numbered marks. But there is currently no review. As the UK's top universities warn of unprecedented demand, the Education Secretary Gavin Williamson has acknowledged qualifications will need to look different next year. The clear message from Westminster now, though, is that students impacted by the pandemic are not to blame, and they should be able to move on to the next stage and celebrate their success. Sean Dilley, BBC News.
Let's talk to our political correspondent, Peter Saul, who's at Westminster. Peter, what are the options being discussed and how urgent is this?
Well, Victoria, clearly it's not just this year's cohort of A-level students who've had it hard over the past 18 months. It's all school year groups. So this is going to be a key issue in education for potentially many, many years to come. In terms of next year's exams, the summer of 2022, a consultation has just ended. They're looking at things like allowing students to take in lists of equations into maths and physics papers, also perhaps only testing them on a small part of the curriculum. Longer term, the government is not denying reports that they might change the grading system, so it's numbers rather than letters, similar to the GCSEs, but that is not something that's going to be imminent. Just looking at the results that we had yesterday, there is a bit of a difference of opinion on what we can read into them. Labour saying the gap is growing between the private and the state sector. The government, though, pointing out that if you look at the relative increase in students getting the top grades, comprehensives have actually fared better than the independent sector. And they say, actually, we really shouldn't be reading too much into what has been a very, very unusual year in terms of exams. But there is this real concern that the pandemic has exacerbated the existing divisions in the education system. And this is going to be one of the biggest challenges the government will have to get to grips with in the coming years. Here in Westminster, lots of people questioning whether the Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, is up to that challenge, with rumours swirling of a potential cabinet reshuffle in the new year.
Thank you very much, Peter. A British man has been arrested in Germany on suspicion of spying for Russia. The man worked at the British Embassy in Berlin and is said to have passed documents to a Russian intelligence agent on at least one occasion in return for cash. Let's speak to our security correspondent, Gordon Carrera. Give us all the details you have.
Well, it does sound a bit like a Cold War spying story, and it reminds us that Berlin was once a spy capital and is still the focus of a lot of espionage. In this case, the allegation is that an embassy worker, who only goes by the name of David S., that's under German privacy laws, they don't give the full name, passed at some point in the last 7 or 8 months documents to the Russian intelligence services in exchange for cash. That's the allegation. Now, we don't know much about David S., but the Home Office say he was a contractor, so not a diplomat. He was working for the embassy in some capacity. This was an intelligence-led operation, I'm told. This wasn't something the police in Germany somehow stumbled across, with MI5 here in the UK involved in the investigation. It appears to have been going on for some time. He was arrested yesterday in Potsdam. His apartment and his workplace are being searched as the investigation continues into this quite serious allegation of espionage.
And what happens now?
Well, we're expecting him to appear in court, not necessarily in public, and often in these investigations, much of the material remains secret because it can be very sensitive where the information came from, potentially intelligence tip-offs and the like. But we may well learn a bit more about him and perhaps what kind of access he had to information, maybe indirectly, or what kind of information about the embassy he might have had, which might suggest why he was potentially, allegedly, targeted by Russian intelligence.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Thank you. President Biden has told Afghan leaders to unite and fight for their country as the Taliban continue to take over more territory. The militants claim to have captured a 9th provincial capital overnight, the northeastern city of Faizabad. However, Afghan officials say airstrikes and ground attacks have killed dozens of Taliban militants. Caroline Hawley reports.
The Afghan President Ashraf Ghani looked vulnerable himself here as he flew into Mazar-e-Sharif to try to rally forces to repel the Taliban advance. His government has faced setback after setback on the battlefield, and the Taliban are now closing in on this key northern city. President Biden has said it's up to these men now to unite and fight, that he doesn't regret his decision to pull American troops out.
Afghan leaders have to come together. We lost death and injury, thousands of American personnel. They've got to fight for themselves, fight for their nation.
But the nation is fractured. This is the town of Pul-e-Khumri, another provincial capital to fall to the Taliban yesterday. Some people here wanted selfies with the insurgents, who've been accused by the UN of committing possible war crimes as they've advanced, and of punishing women who breach their strict rules. Tens of thousands of civilians have already fled in terror in what is a growing humanitarian crisis. Many, many more Afghans will be uprooted as the fighting goes on.
our teams are out in the field in Kabul today trying to understand the needs and really have described to me that this is the worst situation that they've seen in Kabul ever. The scale of people who are arriving from provinces all across the country is really unlike something that we've seen before, with people who have fled their homes with just the clothes on their back, who are scared about relatives who are still in the areas where they are from.
The Afghan government says it's doing what it can to repel the Taliban, but the EU has estimated that 65% of Afghanistan is now out of their hands. In some places, Afghan forces have given up with barely a fight. This is the city of Kunduz, which the Taliban took at the weekend. With the militants now taking the battle to the towns and cities of Afghanistan, casualties are mounting fast, and aid agencies are becoming increasingly alarmed. Caroline Hawley, BBC News.
Our correspondent Yugita Lamai is following developments from the capital, Kabul.
The pace at which the Taliban is taking control of provincial capitals has shocked people in this country, the government of Afghanistan and its international partners. The government says that its forces are trying to regain control of some of these cities, but the surge in violence has led to a humanitarian crisis not seen in decades. We were in the north of Kabul city today, where thousands of people have come in just over the past few days, fleeing areas around the country where there's been intense fighting. On the ground there's a sense of desperation. People literally packed up everything they had and left very quickly, so they're not carrying very much. We saw some people coming in to distribute food and they would be surrounded by scores of people immediately. We didn't see the presence of government agencies or humanitarian agencies, so there's a lot of anger as well about people being left to fend for themselves. They've come to Kabul because they believe this is the last bastion of safety. From here, there's nowhere else to run, but increasingly now, there are concerns about how long the government will be able to keep control of the capital city of Afghanistan.
A senior government advisor has told the BBC that a mass rollout of a third booster dose of the COVID vaccine may not be needed. Professor Adam Finn, who sits on the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, said it's still unclear whether all over 50s should be offered a third jab this autumn. Our health correspondent Jim Reid is here. What's he been saying then?
So some people are just getting their second jab of a COVID vaccine, but already we're talking about these potential third doses, Victoria, in the autumn. There's two reasons why scientists, some politicians might want to go ahead with this. One is to top up immunity. There are some early signs in some research that over time the immunity you gain from taking a vaccine might fade, although at the moment research in that is ongoing. The second main reason is the potential emergence of new variants of the virus this autumn, and again a third booster dose might offer some extra protection against that. So yesterday the Health Secretary for England, Sajid Javid, was asked about this, and he suggested the plan would probably be all over 50s would be offered a booster shot at the same time as their flu shot this autumn. But before going ahead, politicians in every part of the UK, every nation, are waiting on advice, final advice from this independent group of scientists called the JCVI. And on the BBC this morning, Professor Adam Finn, who sits on that body, said two things. One, it was quite likely that a small number of very vulnerable patients would get this third dose of a jab. So if they have suppressed immune systems, if they're dealing with cancer treatment or a transplant, for example. But he said studies to work out if it's worth rolling it out much wider to all those over 50 were ongoing. And he said a final decision on that was still, as he put it, uncertain.
We need to review evidence as to whether people who receive vaccine early on in the programme really are at any serious risk of getting serious disease, or whether the protection they've got from those first two doses is still strong. We clearly don't want to be giving vaccines to people that don't need them.
So this debate is coming at a time when other scientists have raised concerns, doubts about whether giving this third booster dose is really worth it, both from a health point of view, but also from a potentially from an ethical point of view. This idea of, is it really right for people in this country to get a third dose while people in some developing countries are struggling to get a first dose? We're likely to hear more about this over the next couple of weeks, with a final decision probably taken before September.
Thank you very much, Jim. Thank you. The time is 14 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. There are calls for the reform of A-levels after a record number of entries were awarded the top grades. And coming up, Lionel Messi speaks about his dreams for Paris Saint-Germain after joining the French club from Barcelona.
And coming up in sport on the BBC News channel, officially unveiled, Lionel Messi holds his first press conference since signing for Paris Saint-Germain, saying his dream is to win the Champions League once more.
Wildfires are continuing to devastate parts of Europe, North Africa and America amid intense heat waves and drought. Emergency teams in Greece are tackling hundreds of blazes, and in Algeria, 65 people have been killed in a series of fires, many of them soldiers battling to put them out. California is facing the second largest fire in its history, one of nearly a dozen burning across the state. Our correspondent Barbara Plett-Usher reports.
In the remote eastern mountains of California, the Dixie Fire devours acre after acre of wildland. Exhausted firefighters are battling a blaze unlike any they've seen before. A perfect storm of severe heat, drought and wind, plus the slope of the tinder-dry terrain, is driving its rapid spread. This week, scientists directly linked such conditions to climate change.
Climate change doesn't cause wildfires or heat waves or drought. What it does is make them a lot worse. That's what's happening in California, and the forecast does not look good. So people are learning the hard way how to live with a new normal.
The fire has left a ghostly landscape in its wake. Days ago, Dixie tore through Greenville, an historic gold rush town, forcing its residents to flee for safety. No one died, but homes and businesses were reduced to ash and rubble. Evacuation warnings for other communities under threat have been issued in 4 counties. Some Greenville residents took shelter in a nearby town, traumatized by loss and dazed by displacement.
It's gone. There's several times in the last week I've wished I could just go home. And then I remember you can't go home, there's nothing to go back to. Even if the house survived, like pretty much the rest of town is gone. There's no power, there's no water, everything's gone. And I don't even know, I have no idea what to do, where to go. I'm kind of lost. And in my personal situation on top of it, I'm overwhelmed. I'm completely overwhelmed.
Leaning on the help of neighbors is not as rare as it once might have been. Fires have become so frequent and so intense, the traditional fire season no longer seems to exist. Normally, it reaches its worst only later in the year.
Some of the folks that have been evacuated many times over the past couple years. We've seen some folks who have come to a shelter for just a few days to return home, to come back again because of those evacuation warnings. So there's a lot of uncertainty for some folks who might not know what the status is of their home or what they're going back to.
It may take weeks to contain Dixie, with still more months of smoke and fire ravaging the West after that. Right now, the priority of firefighters is to defend lives and homes, to prevent another Greenville from happening. Barbara Plett-Usher, BBC News, Los Angeles.
A group of former Gurkha soldiers who are on hunger strike outside Downing Street say they are getting weaker by the day. They're calling for Gurkhas who retired before 1997 to be eligible for a UK Armed Forces pension. Ministers say they're committed to ensuring the Gurkha pension scheme is sustainable and fair. Our correspondent Lebo Diseko reports.
British and Gurkha troops are battling to split the terrorists into isolated bands and then wipe them out one by one.
They're a force that has served the Crown for more than 200 years, fighting all over the world. But these Gurkha veterans do not receive a full UK Armed Forces pension. They're now on hunger strike and say they're willing to die to right what they see as a historic wrong. Gurkhas who retired before 1997 were part of the Gurkha pension scheme. They received less than those in the Armed Forces pension scheme because it was thought they would retire in Nepal.
The Gurkhas are coming! Aye, Gurkha!
But in 2009, after a high-profile campaign backed by the actress Joanna Lumley, most Gurkhas were allowed to settle in the UK. Many now say they're struggling to survive on pensions that don't meet the cost of living here.
My counterpart gets nowadays over 1,200 to 1,300 pounds. I'm getting somewhere 350 pounds.
Gyanraj Rai joined the Gurkha forces at the age of 17 and served for 20 years.
We want to be treated equal to the British in every aspect, according to the tripartite agreement's spirit. So that is what British government does not want.
These veterans say they've been failed by successive governments, both Labour and Conservative.
I want to work cross-party to find a solution. It cannot be right that government are treating Gurkha veterans in this way, that they are resorting to going on hunger strike. And I think parliamentarians need to step up and take action. Ben Wallace needs to look out of his window, walk the 10 metres to where this protest is taking place and take action.
A spokesperson for the Ministry of Defence said in a statement, "We greatly value the huge contribution Gurkhas make to the British Army," adding, "We are committed to ensuring the Gurkha pension scheme is sustainable and fair alongside other UK public sector pensions." These Gurkha veterans say they want the British and Nepalese governments to set a date for talks about their plight and say they want a Gurkha representative to be there. If that happens within 3 months, they're willing to postpone their hunger strike. Lebu Diseko, BBC News.
There's been a rise in the proportion of job adverts that offer people the chance to work from home, according to a recruitment firm. Before the pandemic, 1% of job vacancies advertised by Reed allowed remote working, but it's risen to 5% by this summer. Many office workers shifted to flexible working during the COVID lockdowns. Deliveroo says demand for its services has strengthened despite the easing of COVID restrictions. The food delivery firm saw orders double to 148 million in the first half of this year, and the value of its transactions also doubled. Despite the rise, the company made pre-tax losses of more than £100 million. Winchester is the least affordable city to buy a home in, according to a survey by the Halifax. Its figures suggest buying a home there costs 14 times average earnings. That's higher than Greater London. Buying a typical home in a UK city will now cost you 8 times your average earnings, with prices continuing to rise faster than wages. Lamb reared on the salt marshes of the Gower Peninsula in South Wales has become the first food in the UK to be granted protected status after Brexit. Other products already protected under European law, like Cornish pasties, are also included in the scheme. Let's talk to our Wales correspondent, Hal Griffith. So, what difference will this make, Hal?
Well, Victoria, from the farmers' point of view, at least puts them on the map. Unfortunately, the elements are against us, because otherwise I'd be showing this glorious coastline on the Gower. And out there somewhere, the sheep that get to graze on samphire, sorrel and sea lavender, and that gives the salt marsh lamb on the Gower coast its unique flavour. Someone who can tell us far more about it is Will Pritchard, the farmer here. What makes these lambs unique and worthy of this special status, do you think?
We've got a wonderful area here on the marsh. And as you said, there's so many unique herbs and grasses that grow there. Our lambs are out there for most of the year. They eat these herbs, it goes into them, and the flavour it gives our lambs is absolutely spectacular.
So what practical difference does this status give you? After all, it only applies within Great Britain and not beyond in Europe.
It could be massive for us, in fairness. We've got to expect there's going to be an increase in demand. It's wonderful publicity for an incredible product.
And in terms of export, I mean, at the moment you're small-scale suppliers, you're not looking to export to the EU. Who actually buys your produce?
We have people coming here to the door at Webby Castle, but most of what we do at the minute is people online all over the UK, going on the website, clicking away, and we post it to them overnight then, so that's most of our business.
Is there such a thing as imitation salt marsh lamb? Is that a genuine threat?
It could be a problem, but I think the product's so good, I think it speaks for itself.
OK, Will, thank you very much. Well, as I said, unfortunately, the elements are against us, but this is a premium product that you find in some restaurants here, and people from as far afield as Scotland, I'm told, click online and buy Gower salt marsh lamb. Other produce that are looking for this new GI labelling within Great Britain include a Dundee cake, Sussex wine and Wiltshire cured lamb. So the UK government keen post-Brexit to put its own stamp on produce. Others will argue, well, it's yet more paperwork for farmers who want to protect their unique and authentic produce.
Thank you very much, Hal. Never tried it, but I will now. An 11-year-old boy has just completed his 500th night sleeping in a tent to raise money for charity. Max Woozy originally set out to raise £100 for the North Devon Hospice, which cared for his neighbour. But since then, he's raised over £500,000. Argentinian football star Lionel Messi has said he dreams of winning the Champions League again after joining his new club, Paris Saint-Germain. The 34-year-old has signed a 2-year deal with the side following that emotional departure from Barcelona, where he started his career. Our correspondent Laura Scott is in Paris, and it's been a heck of a week for Messi, hasn't it?
It really has been, and it was a very different Lionel Messi that we saw today to the tearful press conference he gave on Sunday as he waved goodbye to his boyhood club of Barcelona. Today he was unveiled at PSG as their new star signing, and he did say he was very happy to be here. And take a listen to what he had to say in his press conference earlier.
Estoy feliz de estar acá, estoy ilusionado, con muchísima gana,
I'm very happy to be here. I'm eager to get going. I still want to play and still want to win just as much as when I started my career. With these players and the staff, I think the club is ready to fight for all of the trophies. I want to keep growing and winning titles, and that's why I've come to this club.
Well, it's died down here outside the Parc des Princes, but earlier there were a couple of thousand PSG fans here to catch a glimpse of their new star signing, Messi. Fans letting off flares and even knocking over barriers, so keen were they to get closer to him. And many of them just said they're so excited for this historic day for the club to have one of the greatest players, if not the greatest player, playing for their club. And he will be part of a formidable squad, perhaps the strongest front line ever assembled in club football, alongside Kylian Mbappe and his old Barcelona teammate Neymar. And it does raise the question how PSG can afford such a squad and comply with the financial fair play regulations. I asked the club's president Nasser Al-Khelaifi that exact question, and he insisted they are complying with the rules and they wouldn't have signed Messi if they couldn't. But he pointed to the commercial benefits of having a player of Messi's stature, and we've seen proof of that today with the long queue outside the club shop, fans eager to get the new Messi shirt, and they just want to know when they're going to see Messi playing for their club for the first time. Well, I watched him play on the pitch inside the Parc des Princes with his children. That was just a gentle knockabout. It could be a few weeks until we see him playing for the club. When he does, the attention will be on whether he can translate all the success and the trophies he won for Barcelona to his new home here at PSG.
Thanks, Laura. Here, seahorses off the coast of Dorset that are at risk from the anchors of boats could be protected by new eco-moorings instead. The creatures are under threat because anchors drag along the seabed, damaging their fragile habitat. Now, experts at Studland Bay have come up with a new way for boats to moor, as John Maguire reports.
These underwater meadows of seagrass provide a vital habitat teeming with wildlife, and it's where you can find the spiny seahorse. Normally up to around 16 centimetres long for an adult, they come here in the spring to feed on plankton or small shrimp and to mate. Famously, it's the male that gets pregnant. It's a protected species, and Studland Bay is a marine conservation zone. But boats in this popular area off the Dorset coast can create serious problems.
We've counted up to 450 boats here in one day. It's the noise, the anchors, the general movement of everything seems to affect the seahorses. They're very prone to stress, and so if you can sort of reduce that stress, then they're quite happy, relaxed seahorses. If they have a lot of stress, then they move back out to sea.
The wildlife presenter Steve Factual has dived here and says boat anchors and mooring chains can damage the seabed.
They completely destroy all the substrate around it, which means that all the seagrass dies, and it gets rid of that binding substrate, which then washes away as sand. And so you just end up with these big barren circles around all the moorings. And within that, nothing can live, and particularly not seahorses.
So here's a solution. The Seahorse Trust is installing this environmentally friendly design. Instead of a chain, the mooring's attached to a fixed point in the seabed via a rubber line that stretches with the tide and minimises damage. Divers put this screw anchor into the seabed. It goes in around 7 feet deep into the seabed, then connected to these rubber pieces here, thick, dense rubber. This is what replaces the chains on a traditional mooring that are said to do so much of the damage. This is held vertically by these floats here. There's then another rubberized cable that goes up to the buoy, which obviously floats on the surface. A boat can come up and clip onto there. The University of Southampton is monitoring the efficacy of the eco-moorings, and if proved to be beneficial, it will mean seafarers and seahorses can coexist peacefully. John Maguire, BBC News, Dorset.
Time for the weather now. Here's Louise Lear.
Hi there, Victoria. Good afternoon, everybody. A bit of a weather lottery out there at the moment. Certainly, if you've got the winning ticket, you're out in the east. Beautiful morning for a round of golf in East Anglia. Further west, just as stunning, but unfortunately, it's been cloudy and wet at times, rather breezy as well. You can see where the heaviest of the rain is sitting across western Scotland into northwest England. Fairly light and patchy as it moves further south. Already, we're starting to see an improvement into Northern Ireland. Some sunshine coming through into western fringes of Scotland as we go through the day as well. But further south and east, that's where we'll see the best of the sunshine today. Clouding over a little into the afternoon with temperatures likely to peak at 25 degrees at 77 Fahrenheit. A little bit cooler underneath the cloud and the rain. Now that weather front is going to sink its way steadily south and east. It will weaken off substantially through the night. A band of cloud, a spot or two of drizzle. Some clearer skies further north. Here we could get single figures, but it does mean a different start tomorrow. We should start off with some sunshine. Make the most of it. Another low is moving in. The winds will start to strengthen once again. We'll see further showery outbreaks of rain to arrive as we go through the afternoon. So our weak weather front then, a band of cloud across the south coast over towards Lincolnshire. A lot of dry weather first thing in the morning. Showery outbreaks of rain into the northwest though as that low starts to move in. Those showers will rattle through at quite a pace as the winds gust to 40 miles an hour. But cooler under the showers into the south and east. We'll see temperatures peaking at around 24 degrees. Again, that's 75 Fahrenheit. Friday should be a slightly quieter day. The low pressure is drifting its way steadily eastwards, so it could still enhance some showers to the north and west of the Great Glen. But not a bad day for many of us. 18 to 22 degrees the high. And as we move into the weekend, that low pressure is still there to begin with, but it does look likely that high pressure is desperately trying to build in from the Atlantic. The wind's swinging round to more of a northwesterly direction, so that could have a bit more of an influence to the feel of the weather, perhaps not quite as warm as it has been with those temperatures just below par. Now, spare a thought for the Mediterranean as we've been talking about the heat wave conditions just recently. Yesterday, we had record-breaking heat in Tunisia and Algeria, and that high pressure bringing that heat looks likely to drift that little bit further west as we move towards the weekend. So we could see some extreme heat this weekend developing inland across Spain. If we get above 47.3, that will be their highest temperature ever recorded. More details on that, about North Africa, about the Mediterranean and North America, can be found on our website. Victoria.
Wow. Thank you, Louise. Now, a reminder of our top story this lunchtime. There are calls for the reform of A-levels after a record number of entries were awarded the top grades. Labour says ministers must do more to address inequalities.
The attainment gap was too big before we went into the pandemic, and it's even bigger now, and there's baked-in unfairness.
That's all from the BBC News at 1. I'll be back at 5 on the BBC News channel on BBC One Now. We'll join the BBC's news teams where you are. Have a lovely afternoon.